So I'm going to start off with just a small background here. At My Pace is a series. I didn't envision myself doing this so much, but it became so, and every time I do another book, it adds meaning, at least to my life. And it began when I took on the Sheryl Sandberg Lean-In conversation. I wanted to expand it to be more about the range of choices we make in our life. Some people, what I say, are leaning in, going on the Autobahn full speed ahead. Others have a more winding path. And my objective was that we celebrate all our choices and that we reserve judgment. And that was this book right here. And so the cover is about blue sky and open roads. That's how we should see our world, blue sky and open roads. And then I thought I was done. And then the next thing happened was that my mother was ailing. She was coming on the end of her life. And I wanted to elevate the conversation from focusing on her to something more meaningful. So I asked people the question, what's one lesson you take from your mother and how it's impacted your life? And that gave us a really rich conversation. And I found out, by the way, that mothers and their kids have way more complex relationships than I probably realized at the time. And that was book 2. And this was about showing your gratitude, or as I say, giving either a flower or an olive branch as you find comfort and peace in your relationship with your mom. So now I had 2 books, and the marketer in me said, well, now you probably need to start thinking about a tagline. But I wasn't, so I thought about that. And so what the At My Pace series is about is, at its heart, it's about personal stories. And then from there, we're able to have a conversation, an expanded conversation, and from there, hopefully, there's emerging insights. So it's stories, conversation, insights. Now I feel like I'm having a tagline start to happen. And then after that, I was not quite sure what I wanted to do, but I realized that I have a lot of millennials in my life. I have 3 children and a son-in-law, so I think technically I have 4 millennials in my life. And on good days, I understand them. On other days, I'm sort of perplexed by the way they frame their world. But I don't fall prey to the generalizations that we always hear about millennials. You know, these are some of the ones. Social media obsessed, narcissistic, want to get there fast. You know, you can imagine all the ones that you've heard. And I wanted to hear from them themselves, how they look at their world, what their challenges are, and what we as baby boomers can glean from it, and also what they can share among themselves that will help them as they find their way. So just in terms of the At My Pace format, what happens is there are 1,000-word pieces, roughly. They're story-oriented. I give guidelines, and I help contributors get their pieces together as much or as little as they need. So I came up with some guidelines for this one. Lisi, who's right here, was fortunate. She was my first contributor. She was an awesome one. There's 29. And so what I want to do today is talk about what I learned and what you do with it. And I'm hoping that we can have a conversation about this. I would like this to be informal, and I would like you guys to ask questions or give me your thoughts as you hear them. So I'm going to start off by just giving you some of the titles. There's 29 pieces in here. I'm going to give you some of the titles to give you a feeling for what I heard, and I want to see whether, raise your hand if any of these either resonate with you or you know somebody close in your life who you think they could have meaning for. Okay, so these are some of the titles. A layered identity. When the world tells you no. Detours. Imposter syndrome. Finding the power of me. A series of new beginnings. A clash of perception and reality. How to love myself. The start and the restart. Turning caring into doing. And keeping the faith. So those are just some. And what was exceptional to me about these contributors, as it was a look at their lives in the most uncurated way. They were extremely honest. When you read this book, you will see that there's a fair bit of anxiety, some depression, some stress, tremendous uncertainty, self-doubt, all the things that we, I know as a baby boomer I have felt for years, but our 20-somethings feel that. And and they explain where it comes from and what they're doing with it. Okay, so I think the best way for me to begin is to describe the first piece in the book and the last piece in the book, because I think it really frames the discussion well. The first piece is Purposeful Prisons. Lisi wrote that. And one of the questions I asked these contributors is, what is a book, a poem, a song, something that resonates with you? I wanted a quick insight into the window of their soul. So tell me what that would be. And they could or could not use it. It didn't matter to me, but at least it helped me to understand who they were. And so Lisi right away said, oh, William Wordsworth, Nuns Fret Not. Now, I was an English major. I happen to like Wordsworth, but I did not recognize that poem. And it's a wonderful poem. And in Nuns Fret Not, it's really about how the constraints in our life sometimes give us purpose and meaning. And so Wordsworth discusses how nuns like convents, how poets like sonnets, they're 14 lines, and how while some people might find those boundaries constraining, infringing upon the things you want to do, Wordsworth argues that those boundaries are purposeful. They're purposeful prisons that anchor you. And Lisi, who describes being a software engineer, a ballet dancer, and an observant Jew, has plenty of boundaries in her life. But for Lisi, those boundaries are purposeful. So she makes the case for those anchors, those very strong anchors, being a good thing in her life. The last piece in the book is called Color Outside the Lines by Kimberly Roten. She is the oldest of the contributors. She went to University of Chicago Law School, did really well, had her pick of jobs at law firms when she graduated. Deeply cares about the social issues of our day, wants her life to be dedicated to the social issues of the day. And so she picked what she thought was one of the most progressive, left-leaning law firms that she could find, that she could work in. But it didn't last very long for her. Even that did not work. And so she leaves the law firm, and she goes and she fights for the social issues, which include immigration rights, sex worker rights, healthcare advocacy. And she finds her way to, today she is the assistant director at Northeastern Law School for policy. But in the course of all that, she discovered that she loves to paint. She loves to dance. She came out. There's a whole sort of sharing of her life and a sharing of who she wants to be, who she is. And so there aren't too many boundaries for her. For her, it's about expressing yourself and being true to who you are. And so we have on one side Purposeful Prisons, on another side Color Outside the Lines, which she literally, as she paints with her fingers, and figuratively as she makes choices in her life that defy some of the more traditional choices. So we have that on the other end. And so the question is, for these contributors, for these 29, where do I fit in? And what are my challenges in finding that place where I can find peace, truth to who I am, support for the things I believe in? I think that's the challenge. By the way, I also was able to survey this group, this is the first of the books that I surveyed my contributors. In the previous ones, I just took their stories and went from there. But I wanted a little bit of data because, after all, we live in a world of data, and it's what I do in my day job anyway. I ended up, I read through these stories, worked through these stories, and as I stepped back and looked at them, I found that there are basically sort of 5 parts of what I think the contributors had to sort of conquer and manage to get to a place that they felt good about. Okay, so the first one is just about being healthy. It's about being emotionally healthy. It's about being physically healthy. It's about feeling like you're standing firm on your own 2 feet with energy and purpose and ready to go. That actually doesn't sound that hard, but it's very hard. And one of the early pieces I worked on was a woman named Pam Knopf, and she writes a piece called Heal Thyself. And what happened was, I met her sister, and her sister said to me, you need to get hold of my sister. She has a piece in her. It'd be very helpful, very therapeutic. I think you should talk to her. So I did talk to her, and I'm just going to read you the beginning of her piece, Heal Thyself. She's 28, so she's older. In this range of 20-somethings, I found that the older you were in your 20s, the more you had to share or more willing you were to share what you had to offer. So this is what Pam says. In June of 2017, I was a bridesmaid for the 5th time in my life. I bought another expensive dress, got my hair and makeup done, and smiled as I walked down the aisle on the happiest day of someone else's life. I looked around the room at this group of friends and realized how far we had come since high school. 6 of the group of 10 were married, with one more couple on the way in a few months. One couple was expecting a child. Another had moved to Stamford, Connecticut and gotten a dog. Most everyone was becoming established in their careers. These people were dear friends and we shared common history, but in that moment, I couldn't help but feel pretty far from their realities. So what happens to Pam is she continues to do her life, but she looks at herself all the time and feels like she's not attractive. She wants to eat less. She ends up having some kind of an eating disorder. She cries. Her mother says to her, "We have to get you help. This is not okay." And Pam agrees. And so through a combination of therapy, meditation, and yoga, she finds her peace and she understands herself far better. And what she says at the end of her piece is that the hard work of her 20s has paid off for her and has laid the groundwork for what she thinks will be a much more positive, much more energizing 30s. So she's looking forward to taking advantage of the foundation she's laid. And what she really wants to do is help others who suffer like her. She became a licensed yoga instructor. She's going through other training. And what she intends to do is to pay it forward because she knows how long and how hard her path was, and she wants to be able to help others. So step 1 is being healthy. And you'll see when you read the book, there's the second piece in the book is called Sliding Doors. It's about a young man in college who falls off a balcony and has serious trauma and has to relearn his gait. He has to relearn so many things that we take for granted. And so he's also looking back at his life and the sliding doors because it was going this way and then it went that way. And so, all of a sudden he sees his life very differently. And he has the same idea, which is get healthy and then pay this forward. And all the people in his life who have helped him, which is quite a large team, feel that there's now new meaning in their life as they realize sort of what you can do for others and also the fight that people have to have in them. So healthy is job 1. But the second one, which I saw some hands raised on, was about managing rejection. And for these 20-somethings, they grew up, many of them grew up in families where they were told they can do everything, the world's their oyster. We tried to groom them for the most possible successful outcomes ever. We tried to make sure that they wouldn't experience too much failure, if any failure. We tried to make their life just smooth as silk. And of course, that's not the way the world is. And so I'm talking to a journalist. His name is Sam Tabachnik. He worked for the Washington Post. He was a contract journalist, a very happy one. They told him, well, probably when the contract runs out, we'll be able to get you signed on as an employee. But as you can imagine, it did not happen. And so now he's faced with trying to figure out what he's going to do next. And you probably know that journalism is not the easiest of places to land another job, And so he sends email after email and has coffee. He talks about how many cups of coffee he has to try to network to land his next job. And all he feels is rejection facing him. And he writes this. He says, "Frankly, I just wasn't used to this kind of repeated rejection. Growing up, I might get rejected from a travel soccer team, but there was always another team to join. I went to schools where the teachers nurtured us. Pretty much everyone got A's and B's. There wasn't a need for a ton of tough love." So the question is what to do next, because he wasn't finding a job. He needed both money and purpose in his life. So he became a Lyft driver. This was not anything he ever imagined. He doesn't actually love driving because he finds the traffic to be very burdensome. But what he discovered was that when he was driving people, he loved talking to them, and he loved almost interviewing them to see what was going on with them, what they were about. And in that way, it confirmed for him that journalism and reporting is really what he's about. And so he continued to be a Lyft driver until he found his job in journalism, another job for a smaller paper. And so it ended up being, he worked his way through it. But when the world tells you no, it's about not expecting the rejection you're about to feel. And I feel that was a theme that made it through so many pieces in this book. How to manage rejection, the surprise of it all, how to pick yourself up and just keep on going forward. So in terms of the steps, the challenges that these contributors had to conquer to get to a good place, one was emotional and physical health. Another one was understanding and experiencing rejection and being able to make your way through it. But there's a third one, which I think both the parents and the kids share, and that's called the burden of expectations. We expect so much from them, and they expect so much from themselves too. And when you live under these high expectations, there's almost only one place to go. And so I'm going to read you another piece that at the beginning of another piece. So back to my asking people, what is a song, a poem, a book, something that resonates with you? In the piece called A Clash of Perception and Reality, Gabriel Rems starts the following. He says, "There's a delightfully smug scene in season 4 of The Office, where Ryan Howard has been promoted to the corporate office in New York City. Ryan's climb up the ladder means he will supervise his former boss, Michael Scott. Clearly pleased with his progress, Ryan looks into the camera and says, 'People keep calling me a wonderkind. I don't even know what that means. I mean, I know what it means. It means I'm very successful at your age. So it makes sense.' And then Gabriel says, 'I thought I was just like Ryan, skipping a dozen steps on my way up. I crave the satisfaction of being considered a wonderkind.' He goes to work for a political newspaper. He's super excited. He gets to be in on the issues of the day. He gets to meet senators. He gets to have all these super cool conversations, he thinks. But then he realizes, especially when he's having dinner with his father, who was a journalist, so what are you really doing? Where, what kind of work are you doing? Where do you feel you're adding value? The more he sort of peels back the layers, the more deflated he feels, the less he likes the newspaper. And he realizes this isn't really a job for him. It's not even a career track for him. And he is now disengaged from that. He's going to go to a public policy program in the fall, and he hopes to enter into a career of politics. It comes from a very good place. He says, I want to give more to the world, a little more to the world than I take back. And so it's all good, but his expectation of being the wonderkind, that kid who would be able to exceed all expectations, that's a hard one to manage. It's a hard one as parents when you place that on your kids, and it's a hard one for kids who have their own expectations that are quite large. And I think it doesn't always come from a bad place in the parents. We know our kids, and we think we want the best for them, but it ends up being in a bad place because it ends up putting pressure that they already feel upon themselves anyway. So when you decide to go do fill in the blank, what will you hope to get out of it? If it turns out to be a path that's not meaningful for you, how will you know? What's a milestone, a measurement, something that you hope to get out of it? What's the marker that you hope to see? And if you don't see that, what would you do? I think the problem is when we start to place our answers on them and they're not their answers. But I think it's tricky. And maybe we have some young 20-somethings maybe in this room. Does anybody want to offer any thoughts as to what we could do, the older generation, to be a little more effective on this one?
I'm probably actually not even old enough for this book to apply because I'm only 19. But I think one of the things that a parent should do is probably let their kid have other role models other than just parents and relatives and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Because that's a really good way for the kid to be very isolated and have they want to live the expectations that their parents have for them.
Right. So other role models and really allowing their kids to find other ways to get their guidance.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great suggestion. So the other part about that is once you have this burden of expectation, you go ahead and you decide you're going to try to go live up to it. What do you do? And so the contributors in this book do a series of what I call experimentation and wandering as they try to find their way. There's a piece by Carla Moody called A Series of New Beginnings. And she describes graduating college, having no money, having to get a job as a volunteer, living with her aunt so she can basically have free living. And during lunchtime, when people might be able to do something, she just wanders the street walking, because walking is free. And she loves water. She's a Pisces, she says. So she looks at water fountains and she entertains herself in the cheapest, freest way possible. And from there, she ends up needing, she decides, okay, I need some money. She gets a nanny job. From there, she goes to work for Groupon. From there, digital media. She just wanders from one job to the next. Then she leaves Chicago and she goes to Colorado. And the last I spoke to her, she says every step along the way, she learns something about what she likes and what she doesn't. And she now understands. And this next job, she thinks she'll last longer, and she thinks she'll have a little longer road on it. But wandering and experimentation is the process. And two things about that. One is that I think if we were to prepare our high school kids and our college kids for this is a trajectory that many go through versus thinking they're going to have a straight shot somewhere, I think that would be helpful. And I think if we ourselves as parents prepare ourselves for this trajectory that's windy and has starts and stops, then that's helpful too, because we place less demands on them and we place less anxiety on ourselves, which just ends up meaning that everybody feels the anxiety that we feel. So that's an example. But on the experimentation piece, I'm going to tell a story. It was really funny. So as you know, I asked, give me a source of something that means something to you, a poem, a song, a book. And so I talked to this man named Aaron Schoenfeld, who I've never met. And he says to me, oh, that's easy. I love Camus' interpretation of Sisyphus. Wow. Camus' interpretation of Sisyphus. So it turns out, let me give you a little background on Aaron. He went to go work at City Year. He graduated college. He thought he'd be a basketball player, but his basketball career wasn't as long as he thought. So he studied anthropology, and he's all about giving back, and he ended up joining City Year and going to Tulsa to teach. Now, he had all these high expectations of what would happen when he went to Tulsa to go teach high schoolers. But he said, here's what he found. So he starts off and he says that I spend most of my day mentoring and tutoring students who are struggling with attendance, behavior, and classwork. I pulled students out of class to give them individualized support. I met bi-weekly with students to discuss behavior and attendance goals for the week. So my services felt futile. I could feel my activist spirit dwindling. And so then what happens? He discovers, he says, I found out that it's tough to tell students to do their homework when their reason for not completing the assignment was that they have no time in between working to support their families and being the primary caregiver to their young siblings. So he was serving a very impoverished, disenfranchised community, and education in the classic sense of what he was trying to teach them was just not possible. And so then he remembered Camus, and the myth of Sisyphus is the boulder that you're trying to push up, and then it ends up coming down. And so in the myth, in Camus' interpretation, the meaning is in the struggle to continue pushing up. And he says to fight the nihilistic tendencies of, it's futile, and you have to find meaning in the everyday grind of doing the job and moving things forward, and the challenge of it all versus the outcome of it all. And so he says in Camus, the most important thing is that we continue to believe in the world and in ourselves, and in the struggle there is meaning. So he completely reframes his job, and he alters his methods. I changed to a more practical approach, hoping to meet students closer to where they were instead of where I wanted them to be. And he describes what he does, and he says all of a sudden the students were improving their attendance, their behavior, their skills. And he says all was not exhausted. My boulder awaited me every morning. But he was okay with it. That was the challenge, and the value was in that push. And so I think that experimentation is just part of the process, and that just like with Aaron Schoenfeld and with Carla Moody, you have to understand and expect the fact that it's going to be sort of fits and starts and a lot of learning along the way. So the last thing I want to talk about is affirmation. So you go through all this process, you deal with rejection, you're in and it's not sequential, right? But you deal with rejection, you've got yourself relatively in a healthy place. You manage your expectations and or your family's expectations. You're figuring out what you want to do. But the end game is that you can affirm what you're doing, and as one of the contributors says, how to love myself. that you really affirm what you're about and that it has meaning to you and that you can feel positive and go forward with this, whatever your mission is. So Esther Steinberg is a comedian, and she's 28 years old. And she is used to being, when she gets on stage, sometimes it's a friendly audience, sometimes it's not a friendly audience. You work hard to even get on stage. She was on a sitcom series for a while. That got canceled. She has dealt with a series of rejections that makes it hard for her to continue to move forward. And yet there's nothing else she wants to do in life but comedy and entertainment. So she goes into therapy to sort of work her way through depression. And I'm going to read you the story that her therapist tells her. And I want to take from you guys whether this would be comforting to you. I think it's curious. One day, my therapist spent our entire session telling me this long story about a movie called Queen of the Nile, which I had never seen. It's about a missionary who goes to Africa. Somehow, the missionary and a man end up on a small boat and they sail for safety. They both die on the boat after a series of terrible events. And right before the end of the movie, the camera zooms out and reveals that they were only a couple of feet from safety. My therapist told me that woman was me. Okay, so stop. First of all, would that make you feel better? Hands up if it makes you feel better to know that you're only a couple, that the shoreline was right there next to you. It's hard for me to imagine. Okay, but here's what she says. She said, I was feeling desperate. She said, now, I didn't go to a therapist to hear him recap a movie, but somehow as low as I was and feeling as desperate as I was, hearing the story brought me a glimmer of hope. My take, when you are in a moment that is difficult and gloomy, sometimes it helps to hear someone else say, you are so close and you can't even see it. So for her, that story emboldened her. And she felt like there is hope. That shoreline is right next to her, and she kept on. And she's actually doing very well. She's on a series of shows and comedies going on, but she uses that as a moment. And she realized she has to really just affirm herself and remind herself that she is good. Her skills are good. She can get there if she wants to. Okay, thank you so much.